Okay, cool. Welcome everyone. This is episode 4 of Q&A with Mitch and Jay. The Jay part of it is a little bit foggy with his internet right now, so he might jump in and out. But we have celebrity guest Ryan Hall today to help us answer some of our questions. Appreciate you coming to hang out with us, right?
Yeah, man. No, I'm stoked. Stoked to hopefully get some advice on some questions here. But yeah, stoked to join you guys.
Nice. Okay, so let's jump into it. So we got a first question, and I'll let Ryan jump in on this first one. This question's from Krish, one of our athletes. And his exact question is, do you have a psychological approach to managing the last 6 miles of the marathon? So Ryan, why don't you take that one away?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I love to talk about this one because the last 6 miles is so tough. And I think a lot of it, honestly, is your approach to the first 20 miles. Like the answer to that question is like, what was your approach in the first 20? If you were really emotionally like motivating yourself the whole time through that first 20 miles, then you're going to get to 20 miles. You're not only going to be physically fatigued, but you're going to be mentally fatigued. I think people don't think about that aspect of it very often. They just think about this wall that's going to hit them. And yes, there's a physiological aspect to that, but a lot of it is like training your brain to turn your brain off, so it's rested and in a good spot when you get to mile 20. So what I'd really recommend is just like practice that in training, where like I tell this to my athletes all the time when I'm with them. I'm just like, turn your brain off, like put yourself almost like in a trance state where you're not thinking, you're just as relaxed as humanly possible, and you're just getting through that first 20 miles as easy as possible. Now, don't expect it to feel easy. That's when you get yourself in trouble. So it can
Yeah.
still feel hard, but you can be mentally not as engaged. So you want to be conserving as much mental and physical energy as you possibly can. So when you hit 20 miles, that's when like you pull out your heart, you pull out all those motivational things, and you get outside yourself. That's probably the biggest, most helpful tip I could give you, is like find a way to like think about people that you love, think about your friends, think about why you're running. And if there's a reason that is outside of you, anything that pulls you outside of yourself is going to be super helpful over those last 6 miles. And then, like, honestly, I remember when I ran 204 at Boston, that last mile, I wasn't thinking about anything except for just putting one foot in front of the other as fast as I could. Super simple, but effective. Like, you don't need to be thinking these like groundbreaking, crazy thoughts. You just need to make it really simple on your mind and be very present in what you're doing, because what really gets people mentally is when they get overwhelmed by what they're trying to do. They're like, oh, I can't possibly sustain this for the last 3 miles of this race. So the way to not get overwhelmed is to just be like, just this mile. All I'm thinking about is this mile. I'm gonna get through this mile, and the grace for me to get through the next mile will be there when I get there, but it's not going to be here right now. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of sick points that Jay and I have actually talked about a lot in regards to whether it's being confident in your training or running, coming back from an injury or something, where it's like so easy to overthink, right? Like if you're coming back from an injury, I mean, as you know, like I deal with injured athletes all the time that are like constantly thinking about how a certain joint is moving. And, Jay and I have discussed like putting them in kind of dividing the mentality up between you either ready to run or you're not. And if you are ready to run, you got to be fluid. You got to just let your body flow, right? And then the next one with like mentality after sort of how your training is going, you have to have put in the right training to be able to relax, right? Because if you want to hit a 7-minute pace for your marathon, but you haven't got comfortable at a 7-minute pace in training, all you're going to be doing is freaking out about that pace for the first like 20 miles, right? And so I think a lot of those come with confidence in your body, being able to just let your body be fluid. And then obviously, like with the training, you have to have done the work to get to the line and say, okay, let me go in and relax, right? And one other thing you touched on, when I was running ultras, it's like this constant battle of like you're just doing math in your head for like 8 hours straight, where you're like, well, how many, there's this elevation, this many miles, and I've got this much time, and you like by the time you're 10 miles away from the finish, your brain is just fried. You know, you think you have anything you could do other than math, right? And I think it's just like, I think thinking about one thing you learn in ultras from that is just being where you are. You know, back to back to the most overused yoga quote, and I love it, which is be where you are and stay there, which is like, so it's just like every time you think of this future, you're just like creating expectations and anticipation. And that takes not just mental and physical, but like emotional energy of like whether you're going to be a failure of success. Like I feel like it drills down so deep and just takes a lot of energy. So yeah, man, great insight there. Is it's really about the first 20 miles, which is what's going to get you lost through. And really, it may not be the last 6 miles, because the last mile you can do whatever you can to get to the end, right? So it's kind of like the last 5 miles. Yeah, sweet. Let's
Yeah,
see what
one quick thing on that too, dude, is just like the connection between the mind and the body. So what I like to do too is whatever point in the race is going to be tough for me. So for me, is at 30K, I take a caffeinated gel. And so I get a little bit of hit of caffeine, some sugar down. Usually I'd start feeling better like right after that. And I know that's going to be kind of like a crux moment for me, you know? So if you know where your moment is, it's going to be tough. I'd really suggest like get a little hit of caffeine there, get a little bit of energy on board. And that's also going to help your mental state.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people speak on the fact that when you do get into a negative space, like the onset of negative thoughts may or may not, but there's a possibility it may be connected to like glucose levels dropping.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
so that could
100%.
be like, yeah. So connecting that where you see like, oh, I'm kind of getting in a little bit of space. Let me get some sugar, and can like immediately switch the whole vibe, you know?
Totally. I mean, that's why people throw around the word hangry, like it's because it's real, you know, when you get hungry, like your mood drops. It happens when you're running or just in daily life, you know?
100%. Okay, cool. So I ran into a couple scenarios this week where athletes were asking me and bringing up the difference in running on a treadmill versus the road. And specifically to me, they were saying, I feel like I get more injured, or I'm a little bit more susceptible to injury when I'm running on the treadmill. So I might speak to the injury part, and Ryan, maybe you can reference some of the training guidelines, treadmill versus road. One thing we see treadmill versus road is athletes like it because you can just set in a pace, right? But that pace is constant, but your energy levels are still fluctuating and your mentality is still fluctuating. So what you find is, let's say you set it you're at this 8 mile per hour pace and you feel great, and then your energy levels drop or something, you don't feel as great, kind of longer in a run. So what you end up doing is you end up staying at that pace on the treadmill, but you think, oh, how can I like relax my body to sort of recover while I'm still at this pace? Which what you're essentially doing is like figuring out what pieces of your body you can relax while at the same pace. So you say, oh, let me just turn my knees off. You know what I mean? But you're still going the same pace. So what you actually like deactivating very important components of your stride, but the treadmill is holding you accountable for that pace. And I would say, like, rather than turning your body off and deactivating some things that might make you more susceptible, whether it's like joint stiffness or it's sort of coordination or sort of core engagement, turning that stuff off makes you more susceptible. So like, I would rather see one of my athletes just put it down to like 7.5 for a second, and then crank it back up, versus just trying to maintain that pace and turn body parts off or deactivate things. I know on treadmills, a lot of people are more susceptible to like lower leg injuries because they do tend to either bounce more. Bouncing on a treadmill, you're just bouncing above a moving belt, so you can actually do less, right? but then you're like increasing impact forces, you're asking more of the Achilles and lower leg. In addition, we see the foot staying on the ground longer behind the body, asking more of the ankle and the Achilles and lower leg. But I think a lot of that has to do with, are you letting the treadmill do the work? Or are you actually like trying to get the same relationship you have with the ground when you're running on pavement or grass on that treadmill? You're actually feeling the ground and you're feeling, the force you're applying. And I think that has a lot to do with the additional sort of injury component that you see on treadmill, which is really just like letting the treadmill do work, turning body parts off, figuring out where you can relax while still maintaining a high pace. And that's sort of been my experience. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, no, that's all really good stuff. The only thing I'd have to add to that is just like also be aware that there is a between treadmills. So like for example, Sarah and I, like she just got a NordicTrack treadmill at our house. And man, that treadmill is so bouncy, like ridiculously bouncy. Like I feel like Tigger when I'm on there running. So it's obviously gonna change your mechanics, so you're gonna run a little bit different on that kind of treadmill. So like maybe if you tend to get hurt on treadmill, play with what kind of treadmill you're getting on. I would say the gold standard for treadmills, and most people would agree with me on this, is woodway treadmills. So it's pretty rare to find those at a gym. But if you're at some kind of like high performance center, that could be a good option. You could also play with some of these treadmills that are at CrossFit gyms. I think they're assault treadmills where they're not powered by energy, like by electricity. And those are supposed to put you in a little bit more natural position for running. So again, just play with it and like change up the treadmill you're on. And then also is, usually you put a treadmill to 1 or 2% grade to try to give you similar mechanics as you'd have outdoors. So definitely do that as well. Whether it's 1 or 2%, it's not gonna make a huge difference, but just play with it and see what feels more like you're running outside. So yeah, that's a couple tips I'd add in there.
And Ryan, what's your experience with in regards to less of the injury side, in regards to like the training stimuli that you gain from being on a treadmill versus outside? Obviously, there's a difference in what kind of run you do, but like I feel like when my athletes are doing some sort of interval training, the paces are generally significantly faster on a treadmill. And then, if they're doing a long run, it's hard to sort of gauge what they're getting out of it that might be different than on the ground. What's your experience on that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think they can be a super helpful tool. You look at like guys like the Engelbretsons, 1500 meter. I think he was second this year, but he won the 5,000 outdoor track and field champs. They do a ton of work on the treadmill. So especially if you're running solo or in the winter months, like I would see it as a positive thing. It's like you were talking about, Mitch. It's a built-in pacemaker, can be super, super helpful for workouts. But I would also recommend you don't want to just do everything on the treadmill. So like oftentimes if I'm using a treadmill, I'll go warm up outside, come out, hit the treadmill, go cool down outside. So you're not running everything on the treadmill because it is a little bit different. It's certainly a little bit easier, which I think is a good thing. Just the fact that you don't have wind, even if it's a still day outside and you're running, you're still having to break like the air. But on a treadmill, like you're not moving anywhere, so you don't have that wind resistance at all. So there's a lot of different reasons why it runs a little bit quicker, but I think it can be really good for that reason, to just get the legs used to spinning at race pace. So I really like using them, especially in the winter time. If you're gonna go outside and it's like super cold, like for me super cold, it's like under 20 degrees Fahrenheit and it's like snowy and icy and stuff, like you'd probably get a better workout just going inside on the treadmill. So I think they can be utilized really effectively. One other thing, common mistake with treadmill usage is on the easy days, it's super easy to just go too fast, way faster than you go outside. So you see that number on the screen, you start hitting faster, and pretty soon you're doing your easy day like way faster than you'd be doing it outside. So like when I was running professionally, we put a towel over the screen, and that way we're not like tempted to keep ramping up the pace, so that's super helpful.
Dude, pro tip right there. Okay, yeah. And then one other thing on the treadmill, from a form perspective, I try and get a lot of people to stop emphasizing this kind of like exaggerated spring because it's how they see that, the professionals running. And a lot of the work I do in form is trying to convince people that like that spring comes from like part of its genetics, but the other part is like years and years, decades of training. That's not like something they're forcing, to be springy. And a lot of form cues I end up giving to people are like, running is essentially just going forward. So everything you're doing in between the step that's stopping you from covering ground forward is some sort of delay. And on a treadmill, it's very useful to be on a treadmill and try and limit your spring, because on the treadmill, it gives you the spring anyway, whether it's because of the feel of the treadmill or you're just trying to like use less energy. It's very easy to be springy on a treadmill. If you use the treadmill to increase your turnover, it actually like it's a really good tool. And it was for me, and I've seen it work for a lot of athletes, where like you could just practice turnover, and now all of a sudden you've done this hour run at maybe 4 to 6 steps higher than you would do it outside, just because you've just been focusing on turning over versus using spring on a treadmill and let the belt go under you. So it's one benefit in terms of form and sort of priming your hips and teaching your hips to turn over a little bit faster. For me, the treadmill was great. I know it's been that way for a lot of athletes too. Yeah, sweet, man. Great insight there. All right, Ryan, this question's for you here, dude. Why don't we just implement Ryan's exact training with athletes?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with that. Like, we are operating off the principles that not only myself, but Jay and all of our Run Free coaches have learned over the years, and principles are bendable, right? Like, they flex with you depending on how your body's feeling. Like, the principles are good guides. Static programs that don't change and bend with the athlete are scary. It's kind of like you're just rolling the dice hoping for the best. You're like, I hope this is going to work. I'm going to stick to this plan and hopefully it's right for me, but it's usually not. It usually can be better if it's customized for you, which is why we do personal coaching, because every athlete is an experiment of one. But the principles do translate from athlete to athlete. So, quick example from my career, after Boston, after I ran 204 at Boston, the guy who won the race, Moses Mosop, ran 203.02 or something. That was like the fastest time in history at the time. And so obviously, I was curious, like, what kind of training is he doing? So like, it's all of the training's online now. I mean, most people put their stuff online. So I had like a week by week, day by day breakdown of exactly how we prep for that race. And so I was like, I'm just going to try it out. And so I tried it out and it did not work well for me at all. I did not respond well to it all because it wasn't training that was designed for me. It was training that was designed for him. And like, I have different weaknesses than he does. I have different strengths than he does. And you got to play off those strengths and weaknesses. Like, you got to train someone who is, say someone's like an ultra marathoner and they're dropping down to the marathon. The way you train them is much different than how you train, say, a 1500 guy or a 5,000 meter specialist. And then you bring them up to the marathon. Like, what you emphasize is highly dependent on individual athletes' strengths and weaknesses. So, and none of us are exactly the same in that category. So things really have to be customized and tweaked. And just how athletes recover is another variable. It's like, some people can go every other day and they're good. They can recover off one day because they're getting, like I was doing, 9 hours of sleep every night and then 2-hour naps in the afternoon. If you're working a full-time job, you don't have that luxury. You can't clock out in the middle of the day for 2 hours taking naps. So of course I'm gonna recover better than you because I'm sleeping more than you.
Yeah.
So like, all these factors have to be taken into account. So if I'm working with an athlete and they're super busy, like, I can't train them as hard as I train because Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to train that hard if I didn't get in those 2 hour naps, if I wasn't sleeping 9 hours a night, if I wasn't eating 6 meals a day. So everything, this is what we're so passionate about at Run Free, is this holistic approach, because all of that determines how hard you can train, how well you recover. And then, like I said, the individual athlete's strengths and weaknesses, we have to cater the training based on those things.
For sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, for me as the 1% coach, I'm kind of like one of the first touch points people get into when they sign up for Run Free. And a huge basis of like their strength program and how I break down their form is the basis for how their training is built from there. Because I see some people that they can run forever at the same speed, right? They could probably run for 5 hours at the same speed. But based on like just how their bodies put together, how their movement is, you can tell like, oh, they can go this speed forever, but they can't even touch this speed. You know what I'm saying? So that's like a pretty clear indication that their training needs to include getting faster, because right here they've just plateaued. If you had a speed you could hold forever, but you can't go any faster, that is a straight plateau. So yeah, it's interesting, coming from whether it's recovery or body composition or athletic history or injury history or movement. These are all factors that go into the program that hold the same guidelines as the program you were doing when you were running really well. So yeah, that's awesome, man. So yeah, right, Jay, unless you guys have anything to add, those are all the questions we got today. Rye, I really appreciate you jumping on. I know that insight is always greatly appreciated.
Yeah, man, super fun to get to chat and answer some questions, and I'll be stoked to come back on from time to time.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we appreciate you guys. Happy running out there. Send us some more questions. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.